Hello, and welcome to this episode of my YouTube channel. I'm Beth Claxton. I'm a medical doctor, board certified in obstetrics and gynecology, and certified in functional medicine through the Institute for Functional Medicine. And we're having a conversation today with Courtney Townley. And Courtney has been helping women around the world take better care of themselves with more consistency and ease for the past 20 years. She coaches from the perspective that deep health isn't about following someone else's set of rules and regulations for your life, but rather getting to know yourself better so you can lead yourself better. Courtney is the hostess of the highly rated podcast, Grace and Grit, where she encourages women to expand the definition of health for beyond the topic of diet and exercise. Yes, absolutely. Welcome, Courtney.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about your personal journey and what brought you to this?
Yeah. So I don't know how far back you want me to go, but I'm going to start like literally from the beginning. I mean, we always joke that I came out of the womb dancing, literally. I've always been a mover. I've always had a passion and a heart for movement, specifically dancing, and really got into a pretty heavy dance career early in my life. And that was always, I think, a driving force for me in terms of getting introduced to so much of the wellness industry, because you may know that dancing is not necessarily a super lucrative profession.
Right.
And so I went on to actually get a certification in Pilates. It was a year-long program in Toronto.
Mhm.
And they ended up hiring me to certify other trainers after this training. And what that did is it exposed me to the world of wellness and
Mhm.
how much was being taught and all the different methodologies and strategies. And so I started off teaching movement because I really, in my naive brain, thought that teaching people to be better movers was the answer to health, right? I just didn't know better. I mean, it was just, I was young. I hadn't experienced a lot of breakdown myself. But then, of course, working with my clientele, which was older than I was at the time, I started to see that there was a lot of lifestyle barriers in the way. They weren't sleeping well, they weren't eating well, they weren't managing stressors in their relationships, they weren't generally fulfilled and happy. And I wasn't equipped to deal with any of that. So I went on to learn more about nutrition. Specifically, I worked with Precision Nutrition. I don't know if you know anything about that school, but it's basically a nutrition school that is rooted in behavior change science.
Mhm.
And through that program, I started to learn these other lifestyle pieces that have such an effect on health and wellness.
Mhm.
And I continued to work with, I would say, largely midlife women through the majority of my career. And ultimately just came to a place where I really started to feel that health and wellness was an exercise in becoming a leader and not a follower. It's really an exercise in self-leadership. And what I mean by that is we're sold cookie cutter programs and protocols to follow that worked for someone else's life, which may or may not work for a period of time. But what I think we miss in teaching people is the skill sets that enable people to lead themselves more powerfully in their decision making, in their behaviors, in their emotional capacity, all of the things. So today, I really teach from that perspective. I call myself a health and self-leadership coach because I'm not telling people what to do. I'm really helping women tap into what they already know, because women know a lot. They have been introduced to so much, and the basic tenets of what keep us healthy are pretty simple. And if we can learn how to be consistent with those basic tenets and learn how to retrust ourselves, magical things happen. So, yeah.
Right. And what's so interesting, you were talking about people buying in. The
Yeah.
buying in begins at home when
Oh,
you're three around the dinner table and what you're served for dinner,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. And for me, it was watching my mom, right?
Yeah.
Like my mom really didn't have the tools available that I now teach women. And so it was always the next diet and the next restrictive thing. And none of it was working. And then to see her, it was really later in her life, probably in her 50s and 60s, where she really started to take time for herself.
Yeah.
and really honor herself in a way that she never had before. And her health completely revolutionized. And it
Mm.
wasn't because she was following a strict regimen of any kind. It was because she was really starting to listen to what she needed. And it was incredible to watch. But yes, at a young age, that was really my first experience of conditioning was, oh, I should always be on a diet. And of course, the dance world didn't help with that because I should always be thin and I
Oh,
should always be something that I wasn't.
oh, yeah, exactly. And and then the other buy-in is like, how are we going to deal with this crisis situation? Well, we learn to deal with it, how our family dealt with it, which might not be like the best tools. And then, I bought into the whole medical trajectory of like, you go to college or you get good grades in high school, you get good grades in college, you get good grades in medical school, you go to residency, you work and work and work and work and work. Yeah.
Well, and also, I think what I hear you saying, and I can identify with this so much, is I was such a good rule follower. I
Yeah.
really was like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Yeah.
Until I got to a point where I was like, okay, what you're telling me to do really isn't relevant and it's not working. And so maybe there's a different path. Maybe there's something I'm not understanding. And I'll tell you, like, the real awakening for me was I was around 34 when I had my son. And up until that point, I really thought health was kind of a look. It was kind of a data point. It was, an athletic achievement of some kind. And I felt like I was all of those things. My data was beautiful and I had a fit looking body and I was an athletic individual. And when I had my son, there was such an identity crisis. Like I was not prepared for motherhood in any way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
And when people came to see me, it was all about, oh my gosh, you look amazing. Like you lost that baby weight so fast. But here I was internally imploding,
Yeah.
right? Like I had all this mental and emotional stuff that I had never had to deal with before. And nobody was talking about that. Nobody was asking me about that. And that, I think, on top of working with so many women over so many years, I really just had this huge epiphany that, okay, the way that people are thinking about health, largely for women especially, it's messed up. Like we got to change this conversation because I felt so unseen and I felt so uncared for.
Mhm.
And that just gave me fuel for the fire in terms of doing what I could to help shift that conversation.
Yeah, I'm so glad there are people with you like you out there because as started getting more into functional medicine and the menopause transition
Yeah.
specifically, it's such an opportunity like you embrace as well. It's such an opportunity for people to really embrace change. There's change already happening, and if we can harness that energy, we can create a completely different life for the second half of our lives.
Yeah, I think I mean, you're so spot on. There's one of two ways to look at it. We can either look at it as a curse, which a lot of women do, right? This is happening to me. Menopause is awful. Life is downhill from here. Or we can look at it as an invitation that my body is now less resilient to stress than it's ever been before. And if I do not take responsibility for removing unnecessary stressors and do what I can to boost my resiliency to stress,
Mhm.
it's not going to go well. And a lot of that is turning inward, not outward. It's really, I call it insourcing, not outsourcing. It's really going in and starting to understand who you are at this stage of life, what you desire, what's working, what isn't, and then shaping your day to day life based on that intel.
Yeah, and I've found inner child work so amazing. Like now she screams
Yeah.
and I can listen,
Yeah.
and that's amazing. And also intuition.
Yeah.
No, really trusting our intuition because it's there. And we know as women, we know as mothers, that's huge is when we're new mothers. We know.
Yeah.
We know we have all these instincts. And media tells us, or our mothers, or our churches, or our traditions tell us otherwise. But we know, and really trusting that.
Yeah. And I think that that's exactly it. I always say that self trust is a nutrient, and it is the nutrient that we are in desperate need of replenishing as women, you know, especially in the health and wellness space.
Mhm.
Because again, there's, like we talked about earlier, there's that conditioning and this idea that someone else always knows better than I. How can someone else know your life better than you do? How can someone else know your experience better than you do? And so, you know, I went from a space of, I mean, literally for nearly a decade of my career, I worked really intensely in the fat loss space and I was really good at it. I helped a lot of women lose a lot of weight.
Mhm.
And ultimately, I didn't really make a difference because they weren't shifting their beliefs about themselves. They weren't shifting their ability to experience the whole emotional landscape of what it means to be human. They weren't dealing with their self-doubt and the things that were really holding them back. And so ultimately what happens is the weight just comes back, right?
Yep.
And so that, I think that experience really got me from giving these cookie cutter protocols to elicit a particular response, which yes, they work for a period of time, to more of helping women to reinvent themselves
Mhm.
and really stand at the helm of their experience, like really take control of all the decisions that they make in pursuit of this second half of their life and making it as powerful and as amazing as possible.
That's so beautiful. One of the foundations of a functional medicine appointment
Yeah.
is a relationship where the physician and the patient collaborate, and and I give them choices and ask them what they want to do, or look at their history and say, maybe with your eating disorder, an elimination diet isn't the best first step. And they get to say yes or no. And sometimes they don't like that. They want to be told.
Yeah, I know.
And that's interesting. And to see actually the healing that can start when they get to be empowered to make those decisions.
It's really what confidence is, right? I mean, the ability to make decisions based on the best of what we know about ourselves, and also trusting that if that decision turns out to be not what we thought it was, we'll still have our own back and we'll make another decision. Like, it sounds so simple, but we have gotten so far away from that. Right. And then we're living in a world of people who aren't really fully expressed or feeling like they're living authentic lives and wondering why they're riddled with disease. And it's
Exactly.
like, well, there's a correlation in all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that I really love that you talk about is integrity pain.
Hmm.
Can you
Yeah.
talk about what is integrity pain?
Yeah. So integrity pain is honestly probably one of the core tenets of what I talk about, in that it's that internal friction that we all have in some area of our life, usually multiple areas of our life. And it's the very real physical, mental, emotional pain that comes from living your life in a way that is misaligned from what you actually want. So, examples of this would be like, we want to have energy in the day, and we're staying up until midnight watching the 50th episode of our favorite show, right?
Mhm.
That causes integrity pain.
Yes.
Integrity pain could look like wanting to have really deep and authentic relationships with other people in your life, but avoiding difficult conversations. That's integrity pain,
Mhm.
right? It could be something, as simple as wanting to have confidence in who you are and how you move through the world, but also hiding from the work that you feel uncomfortable doing because you just haven't been practicing it. So all of these things can cause integrity pain. And as your integrity pain pile gets higher and
Mhm.
heavier,
Mhm.
I really feel that that's where the body starts to break down,
Mhm.
right? And integrity pain can be so many things. It can be not healing trauma from our past, right? It could be not going after the things that we want to create. I mean, there's 1,000 different ways to generate integrity pain. But when we start looking at the truth of where our integrity pain is coming from and we start addressing it, that's, I think, where healing really starts to happen, because we're no longer in dissonance with our life.
Right. Right. It's another word for cognitive dissonance. Like we know what we need. And many people, myself included, need a breakdown to really start to look at, okay, what is happening? What am
Yeah.
I not seeing?
Yeah. But if we look at how most women are living their lives, or a large majority, and we're even encouraged to do this, we're
Mm,
so busy. We're so busy with all the things, and we're so busy with things that aren't really even that important to us.
mhm,
But it's almost a tactic to avoid the work that we're calling ourselves into. I call it a hiding habit, to stay
mhm,
so busy with things that aren't important that you actually never have time for things that are.
mhm, mhm.
Right. And that busyness prevents you from actually building a strong relationship with yourself, because you never have time for yourself. And as you know, with any relationship, if you aren't spending time in the relationship, it's really hard to improve the relationship.
Exactly. Exactly. It's so funny. Since I broke my arm
Yeah.
about 7 weeks ago, and I've been releasing commitments and really taking time for myself to rest. Like, and the couple weekends ago, I realized I was bored. And I
What a
went,
concept.
wow,
Right.
this is an opportunity.
Yeah.
Wow.
And boredom has so much value in our life, right? I mean, it does. We just don't allow ourselves to be there very often. And then when we are there, it's really uncomfortable because we don't often practice it. I don't know if you ever read Michael Easter's book, The Comfort Crisis.
I love it.
It's such a brilliant book. But he talks about in the modern world, we're never bored because there's always something to watch or to scroll or to listen to or to consume. And it's costing us our creativity. It's costing us our decompression. It's costing so much opportunity for things that happen when we're bored. And look at what kids do, right? We always encourage boredom with kids. My kid is 14 now. And just the other day, we don't watch TV in our house during the week. And that's very intentional, because I have a hard time controlling myself if I can watch it whenever I want. And I know he has a hard time. So he came up to me last night and he's like, Mom, I've done my homework, I've done my chores. Can I watch something? And I said, no, like, that's just not what we do. Figure it out. And you can see he was so uncomfortable because he couldn't figure out what to do. And then I looked outside 5 minutes later and he was outside on the tramp, jumping, like, figuring it out.
Yeah.
And I feel like that it's such an underestimated thing, the power of boredom.
Mm.
Um, and anyway, I think as adults, we almost need a practice of boredom, because I think there's so much goodness that comes from it.
I agree. I was, as you were saying that, I was thinking, I wonder if there's like a parasympathetic
Yeah. Oh,
aspect of boredom, that your nervous system is just absolutely, completely relaxed. And there's not a thing to do. There's not a push. There's not a trigger. There's not fight or flight from anything, but just sit like a lump. Yeah, that's great. That's
but
super.
what's interesting, and I'm sure you come across this as a woman and also working with other women, I see a lot of my clients actually turning boredom into a sympathetic nervous response, because there's
Mm-hmm.
the thoughts they're having about it. Something's wrong. I'm wasting time. I shouldn't be doing this. I should have something that I'm getting my hands into. And then that generates all this stress, when really it's an opportunity, like you said, for the parasympathetic to come online and do its repair work.
And this is why I teach mindfulness-based stress reduction as a part
Oh,
of
so good. I love it. Awesome.
it. So
I'll
we
tell
can
you,
learn how to sit.
I so appreciate that. When I first had my son, I took an MBSR course
Oh, yeah.
because I felt so reactive. And
Mhm.
I knew that I didn't want to be that parent that was always reactive to all the things around me. And I'm certainly by no means a master of it in any way, shape, or form, but it was so immensely helpful. So I'm so glad to hear that that's part of your work. That's awesome.
What did you learn? Can you just say a little bit
Um,
about what you
I
learned?
think for me, it was like really foundational things. It was just creating space for quietness.
Mhm.
Right. And I started to learn like what the practices of meditation might look like, because they don't always look the same for everybody.
Exactly.
That I could be moving my body and meditating. I don't have to be sitting still and just watching my thoughts.
Mhm.
Um, I think it really helped me to emphasize the power of awareness, and
Yeah.
just acknowledging that awareness isn't necessarily a feel-good exercise, and that's okay. It is such a worthy exercise because we can't change what we don't see.
Right.
And
Right.
we need space and quietness in order to reveal that. So it was all of those things for me. And I think it was also just a sanctuary from being a new mom and feeling so lost. And like, I can just come into this class for 90 minutes and not have to stress out about all the other things that are going on outside of this room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a container for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, my classes are 2.5 hours, and people say, "Oh no, I just don't have that time. That like I can't miss work.
Yeah. Mhm.
Use vacation time," and that it goes so fast.
So fast. So
It's good.
fast.
I love it. It's one of my favorite things I ever do.
Yeah. And I think that phrase too is so important, like that I don't have time phrase, because a lot of people use it for everything in terms of, especially in terms of self-care. I don't have time to go to bed on time. I don't have time to get enough sleep. I don't have time to eat well. I don't have time to exercise. I don't have time to meditate. I don't have time to be bored.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I always remind them that's not a true statement, right? We all have time. It's the bigger truth is you haven't made this a priority yet.
Mhm.
And the more you acknowledge that that's the truth, eventually you get intolerant of that truth, that I'm not making myself a priority. And maybe it's time.
Mhm.
Maybe
Mhm.
it's time.
Maybe it's always time.
Yeah.
It's always time for something uncomfortable.
Right.
If
Well,
you know that intuitively that that's what you need to be doing.
yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So what are the skills that you teach women?
Yeah.
Like,
So I have a sort of the intro to my private clients, and I also run a membership community called Rumble and Rise. But the entry to all of that work is a program called the Consistency Code.
mm,
And it's 4 very simple practices. And I call it a framework that evolves as you do. So, obviously, as humans, we're evolving throughout our entire life. We're not static things, we're dynamic things. So, we need a framework that can evolve as we do. And so, I'll just tell you really quickly the 4 practices. Number 1, the practice of radical honesty, which is the practice of awareness. So, how do we hold ourselves accountable to how we are showing up in our life? And how do we do that daily? Not once, not every year when we go on vacation for a week, not, a couple times a year where we go away for a girls' weekend, but how do we actually stay awake to our life daily? That is so fundamental.
yeah,
And
mindfulness right there.
yeah, it is mindfulness. And because I always say, like, we're sleepwalking through life, we're reacting based on all these past behaviors, and reactions are very unconscious. We're
Mhm.
not consciously choosing to show up in these ways. So, with awareness, we can start becoming a lot more intentional.
Mhm.
So, step 1 is radical honesty. Step 2 is we plan for sovereignty. It's the practice of organization. If you do not define your own standards for living and what is important to you, you will turn to the outside world to do that work for you, and they will happily do it for you. The outside world is not short on opinions on how you should be living your life. And what happens when we look to the outside world is we get overwhelmed. We get
Mhm.
totally overwhelmed by all the information that's coming at us.
Mhm.
So, planning for sovereignty is basically me making decisions each day to lead myself in a powerful way. So, based on what my standards are, what my priorities are, how am I going to spend my day so I can put my head on the pillow tonight and feel at peace with how I showed up? That's what planning for sovereignty is. And it's a daily practice, literally recognizing that I have so many hours in my day today. And how am I going to structure that time so I'm not living in fight or flight all day? I'm letting my nervous system oscillate, right?
Yeah.
Between the sympathetic and parasympathetic. How do I organize my time so I feel like I'm not completely burnt out at 5 o'clock and then want to eat everything in the kitchen? Right? I mean, there's a lot of things that planning really a well-planned day can help save you so much integrity pain.
Mhm.
Step 3 is, this is the biggest thing I coach on, is the practice of keeping promises to yourself, which is, I call it the practice of follow through. It's really where we struggle the most. We can make promises and make commitments very easily to ourselves, but following through on those promises we're not so awesome at, not with any degree of consistency. We're good for a week, we're good for a month, but showing up for ourselves in whatever way that looks like today, every single day to make sure I'm cared for, that's something entirely different. And so there's really two big skill sets baked into that. There's a lot of mindset work because you will show up according to what you believe about yourself and about your life.
Mhm,
So we do a lot of reframing, a lot of restructuring about the tape that's playing in your head.
mhm,
And then the second piece of follow through that I think is missing, honestly, from so many wellness programs out there is the emotional agility piece. Learning to honor what you're feeling and what those feelings are asking of you. Um, and that's not something I ever learned as a kid or even as a young adult. It's something that I had to learn in my midlife, which
mhm.
was a lot harder than it had to be if I had learned these skills younger. So we talk a lot about emotional agility in that. And then the final practice is just the practice of realignment. Perfection is an illusion. You are going to get misaligned all the time, sometimes multiple times a day. So, what practices do you have to consistently realign with your truth and the way that you want to be showing up in your life? Because that's really the name of health. If I can realign myself when I find myself straying from what is true for me, I'm going to live a pretty damn good life.
Yep,
So
yep.
just those four practices, and there's so much baked into all of it, right? I mean,
Oh,
there's
yeah, that's great.
yeah,
It's a great recipe.
it is, and it's so simple, and it's so repeatable, and it's you just rinse and repeat. I say that all the time. Like it's not a linear path. Those four practices, it's a circle. Because what happens when you get misaligned? You go back to awareness, you go back to organizing, you go back to follow through. You get misaligned, you do it all again, and you do it all again. And life is that circle, right?
Yeah.
So
Or even like that spiritual nautilus shell where you get like tighter and
right,
tighter
I
and
love that.
tighter. Look at it even closer.
Yeah,
Yeah, 'cause the first time around, it's like, ooh, it's all new. And then the second
sure.
time, you've got like the walls on other side, and you're like, oh, okay, I've seen this before. So it's easier to get through
And I
new.
love that you bring that up because I think that's just so true of as many times as I've taught this course. It's not about I mean, the information is important, but what's more important than anything is the practice.
Mhm.
And so after years of running this course, we ended up figuring out that there's a need to have this incubator of ongoing practice for women, which is how I started my membership site. So people go through the consistency code. And then if they want to go into an arena of practice for as long as they need it, some women need it for a few months. Some women, I've had women there for 5 years because they just love the culture and the normalizing
Yep.
of these conversations because they realize they're not the only one. And this is ongoing work. It's not, there's not a finish line.
And that is such an important point, the isolation. We are not living in isolation. So many women start to have their perimenopausal symptoms in their late 30s, early 40s, and they feel so isolated. They feel so broken, so wrong, and they retreat. And we get to reach out and find other women because we're all experiencing this. Some don't, but I really, in my heart of hearts, think that everybody, every single woman experiences something,
Yeah.
some change in that time frame. And
Yeah.
then the menopause transition happens, and then like there's no denying it.
Right. Well, and I feel so lucky I mean, I'm 47 and I probably started perimenopause. I don't know. I mean, honestly, like you said, I felt shifts in my late 30s. So,
Mhm.
it's been a hot minute.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel so fortunate to live at a time where the conversation is getting so much louder and that there are so many arenas where we can normalize these conversations. And oh my gosh, like I look back at my mom and how horrendous her transition was and the fact that nobody was talking about it and who could she turn to other than maybe her sister and her own mother. So anyway, it's a good time in
Yeah.
history to be going through these shifts because there are so many resources available, which I am incredibly grateful for.
So exciting. And I also, thinking back, working in this space and thinking back, we were kind of like the first generation to really start talking about periods when we started our period. And when we start, there were books written about it, like,
Yeah.
oh, like this is where we're anticipating it. I mean, how beautiful, and not think that you're dying when you start bleeding someday when you're 13 or 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, or younger,
Hmm.
babies.
Right.
And in the pregnancy, like we were all, I felt like the word was getting out about pregnancy, like this whole function of a woman's body,
Mm.
I feel like in our time has really progressed. And now we're all perimenopausal and menopausal, and like we get to talk about it.
Yeah.
It is.
Yes. And what a blessing, right? To
Yeah.
younger generations too, for them to be able to have that access to that information and yeah, and take it further, right? Keep studying it and keep learning new things and keep just making this a normal part of the female experience because it is.
And I really want to get the word out there to men too, so they
Yeah.
understand what is going on.
Yep.
And your son, so he knows what's going on. Women
Mhm.
are different. We can be strange and unpredictable, and this is why.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny you say that. I just had Amazon just delivered Dr. Marie Claire Haver's new book, The New Menopause. My husband opened the box and he's like, well, clearly this is for you. And I was like, actually, I think this is for both of us.
Good
So,
for you.
so we'll see. Time will tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even if he doesn't ask questions, you can still tell him. You can tell him
100%. And that is the way it will roll for sure. Like I will be the one relaying this information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, is there anything you want to add?
Um, I don't think so. I mean, I think to any women listening who are in that space of transitioning through perimenopause and into menopause, just reiterating that message that it is such an invitation for reinvention. And you are at a time in your life where you have learned so much about yourself. And I always say that midlife is a time to step out, not fade out. Like enough with the inauthenticity, enough with the people pleasing,
Yeah.
enough with the hiding. These are all opportunities for us to overcome all of that. Like this time in our life is an opportunity for that. And I truly believe that as we fix all of those things, I don't want to say fix always seems like you need to be fixed, but as we heal those areas, those spaces and places, that's where deep health comes from, is from doing that work
Yep.
of I know my worth. I deserve to be heard. I deserve to be seen. I still have value. I deserve self-care
Mhm.
and show up in your life accordingly.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Yay. Oh, good.
And
Thanks
I
for
will
having me.
post your website
Yeah.
at the bottom of this so people can link to you.
Awesome.
It's important work. Thanks for doing it.
Absolutely. It's a privilege. I really love it. I really love what I do. And I can't imagine what else I would do. So
That's
seems like a
great.
good fit.
Yep.